So what we're going to look at here is talk about CMMI, not as a compliance engine, not as something that we need to get a level to, but rather as a predictive model, as something that will allow us to use it properly to prevent issues and things that we do not want to occur and be able to see them ahead of time. The model has always been an advocate of proactive management, and the FDA has taken that premise and used it in a way to enable the medical device companies to not be caught off guard with non-compliances. So what we're going to go through, and I'm not going to spend much time on the introduction to CMMI. I saw the participants. You guys know about CMMI. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the regulations that the medical device companies have to adhere to, how they chose the CMMI as a method to assist organizations in predicting non-compliances, and a little bit about that method associated or what we do to utilize the model for these companies. So, as I said, we're going to start a little bit with an introduction to CMMI. And the normal overview to CMMI, obviously, is, oh, it's going to improve my processes. I'm going to use appraisals and various methods to assess those processes. And what the newest versions of the model, 2.0, 3.0, have been pointing to is you're not just doing this. We've never used the term compliance with the model, but you're not just doing this for a level. You're not just doing this for recognition. You're doing this to enable you to better perform. And that performance is directly linked to your business objectives. And I think the latest, poor Jeff, who's still back at 1.3, isn't seeing all of the improvements that we've put in 2.0, in 3.0, to focus on performance and aligning the organization with its business objectives. So the benefits then of the model, all right, is improving that efficiency, okay? And whatever the definition of that efficiency is, whether it's on a line, whether it's getting a medical device to market, whether it's getting through FDA's approvals, and getting the latest life-saving devices out there. It also is enabling them to enhance quality. It doesn't guarantee quality, and we all know that, but it certainly enables them to put quality, design quality directly into their products. And you're going to see some actual results to show that we have unintentionally greater satisfaction, all right, by the customers, by the internal stakeholders. And by this proactive method, we've had better risk management in our method. And when I talk about the risk management, it's being able to look at current state, predicting future state, and identifying risks that could happen in that future state. So the medical device organizations out there have strict regulations. They're for safety, effectiveness, and it's really critical that they're compliant with those regulations. They have, as I said, regulatory requirements. They have testing requirements. They have documentation they have to produce. So there's very rigid regulations around those medical devices. And we want them to be, right? These are life-saving devices. So regulations, they're to, as perhaps future customers or loved ones who are going to be customers, we want those regulations in place. So what are some of them? Well, there's FDA regulations, and they're very specific to that. They come in and audit. There are things that they have to do in order to certify their production lines in order to bring a product to market. And a lot of times these regulations, yes, they're to FDA and selling to FDA. There's also, but in addition to the federal requirements, there are state requirements. So they're very much regulated into what they do. There's also a number of ISO standards that they have to be compliant with. These ISO standards are also mandatory, not only for, in some cases, FDA, but for some of the specific markets that they're going out to. And then we talk here because they're very, very strict about their quality management system. And this is, that area defined within the regulations, within the ISO standards as to production, management of those lines, the training of those lines. But we want to go beyond that. We want to look at their entire business. We want to take it beyond these regulations, beyond these standards, look beyond the quality management systems in order to identify those risks that could hurt them in their regulations, in their standards. Because you can't just take that core, which is what was happening with the regulations and the ISO and the quality management system. It was very, very focused. We want to broaden that, and we want to look across at the risks that could potentially cause non-compliances. So the FDA realized that by the time there was a non-compliance, okay, it's too late, right? For a lot of times the non-compliance, if it is a critical non-compliance, it can cause a recall, and it can actually shut down a company for a year. It can also take that medical device off the market for a year or longer. These are life-saving devices. Can't afford that stoppage. There needs to be a way to look proactively at what could occur. When could I expect a non-compliance so I can avoid it before it happens? So back in 2011, Dr. Shuren, who just recently retired from the FDA, launched a study, and he called it Case for Quality. And he went to the MDIC, which is a medical device an industry consortium. And he said, we've got to come up with a way to proactively, to anticipate, to predict these non-compliances so that we don't find out about them, so they're not a surprise to us, so they're not shutting us down, so that in the marketplace, we're not losing lives because a medical device had to be taken off the market. So they realized they needed help. They put a group together to look at this, and they hired Deloitte and Touche, and they brought them in and they said, here's what we want to do. We want to proactively look at medical device companies and be able to predict possible non-compliances. So Deloitte and Touche went out. They looked at a number of standards. They also looked at models. Now, realizing that a model, okay, has no shall statements. We're not looking at compliance, no clauses, but they're instruments. A model is an instrument that can be used and interpreted for the various industries to look at and to employ in order to get a view, a mirror view of what's going on inside. So Deloitte chose CMMI as an appropriate vehicle. So in 2016, we started a proof of concepts pilot. And how can we use this model? A number of lead appraisers were chosen to work with the FDA and come up with a method that we could use with medical device companies to determine, okay, if we come in and we look at this, how can we determine, how can we predict what could be a risk to you and could potentially cause a non-compliance in the future? We went out, excuse me, we went out, we had volunteers from companies. We put very strict criteria around those companies that could volunteer, had to apply for this pilot. And we chose these companies. We went out, we started doing, and I'll talk a little bit more obviously about the method that we use. But we went out and we started looking at these organizations, and we visited them, and we walked their lines, and we talked to the various individuals. So really became a very hands-on pilot. Had to determine if indeed this was right, if we should make this a program. And you'll see in here that there was that 3 years between 2018 and 2021. In 2021, when the FDA finally transitioned this from a pilot to an actual program, it probably would have been done sooner, but we had an annoying little virus that showed up at that time and couldn't proceed. But finally in 2021, we became an actual program. And I will tell you that as of, I think, April, we've done over 520 some appraisals in medical device companies. And certainly those companies have benefited. Some of those companies have now been in this for 7 years. You know, they started out in the pilot and are continuing to get benefit year after year as far as looking at the evaluation. So what do we do? Okay. So a program comes in, a medical device company comes in, they apply, they're chosen. Now what do? We have taken the evaluation appraisal method, okay, right out of the MDD, the method description document, and we have tailored it for the medical device companies. The first year we come in and we do a baseline appraisal. We've talked to them on the phone. We got to know each other. We come in with 11 set PAs. They don't have any choice at the PAs that year. We come in, we do a product, we walk a line, we take a tour of the facilities, we talk to individuals, and we get a feel for this product. And you'll see the list of the 11 PAs that we determined make up the baseline. The biggest challenge in our baseline appraisal year is convincing the organizations we're not auditors. These organizations are only familiar with audits. So we come in and we tell them we're going to do an appraisal. Oh my gosh, do I still need a back room? What are you going to look at? This baseline year, we just come in, we talk to individuals. We don't look at any documentation. We strictly, they get to know us, we get to know them. And these 11 EAs, you know, they're the basics you can look at to get to know each other, okay? After that first appraisal, we do reappraisals every year. Now, I often tell the companies after year 1 is when you can really start to have fun, okay? Again, in year 2, we don't look at documentation. In year 3, we do, but this documentation that we look at in year 3 is very high level. It's not like the libraries that you put together for benchmarks. It's just maybe minutes from a meeting or a spreadsheet or a demo of a tool, outputs from that tool. So after year 1, like I said, I hate to say we start to have fun, but it's at the discretion of the organizations. So what happens after year 1, now they've got to feel that, okay, we're not auditors. We really are there to look at them. They'll come in and they'll ask us, could you appraise our our employee orientation training. We don't think we're getting people up to speed as efficiently as we could. We choose the PAs that make sense to do something like that, and we work with them in an appraisal, in this evaluation appraisal, to look at that transaction. Because we have so many companies that have multiple sites, in other words, they have a location in this state, they have another location in another state, they may be involved in transfers. So on a reappraisal, after we've baselined and both those sites are in the program, we might look at one site and do an appraisal on them as senders, and then do an appraisal on the other site as receivers. Wonderful way to identify, are you meeting expectations? Do you understand what the sender really is asking for? Are you getting what you need from the receivers? So there are so many ways to help the medical device companies in these reappraisals in the year after year, that it truly blends in with their business objectives, with their goals. And what we talked about, in that second slide on the intro about benefits from the CMMI, here's a real benefit, okay? Using those PAs to look at efficiency, look at expectations that are being set. And I think it's really neat when we use it that way. It's really cool to use it that way, because now I was a child prodigy in my early in CMM. I do remember some of the early talks that Watts Humphrey gave, and his intent of this being so focused on continuous improvement. And I think in some of the areas, it lost that continuous improvement focus. It lost the ability to make organizations perform better, to enhance their effectiveness. And I think what we do and what the FDA's vision was here, we've been able to bring that back into the CMMI. It's almost like a back to the future. The last thing on here are the final results. After every appraisal, we come up with final results deck. If you've done appraisals, and I saw there are a number of lead appraisers on there, that final results that you give to the sponsor at the end of that appraisal. We do the same thing here. However, here it is strictly the sponsor's final results. It goes into CAS just as a check that we've met our quality expectations and did a final report. There's a single page of that PowerPoint presentation that goes to the FDA, which just shows they continue to be involved. But all the results are up to the organization. We don't check. We're not like the auditors. Another great example for them when they do it on the baseline appraisal is, how long do we have to respond to these results? They're totally yours. I often use the phrase, they're informative, but they could be ignorative. The results are at the discretion of the organization. We simply give them to you to recognize that we've been there, we've looked at things, we know what could be potential risks for you, but they are strictly yours to do with what you will. And we don't just pop in every year, okay? We do have quarterly checkpoints. So every quarter after that appraisal, we have a meeting. And we generally talk about changes in the organization since the appraisal. If indeed they did look at some of those results and decided that, oh, I want to work on this, I have a project now to do, I want to review that with you as an appraisal lead, because I want to make sure I've addressed what you saw in the appraisal. That's what we do in the checkpoints. Again, we're not demanding that we talk opportunities. It's up to the organization. But we talk once a quarter to stay involved, to make sure that they're still focused on these activities. And if you're familiar with the addition to the method and in 2.0, there is a performance report template. We've tailored that template and we ask at year one, after the second checkpoint. So in other words, they've had a design result. We've done the first checkpoint. At the first checkpoint, we introduce a tailored version of that performance report template. And we ask them by point 2 if they can fill that out. And we don't want them to create a metrics. We want them to be metrics that exist. We have categories for them, and we ask them to fill out that template. And every checkpoint from then on, including the reappraisal time, we ask for an update. And we do keep them in a software tool that ISACA has generated. And it's really not, the reports that we run from those metrics that we collect are non-attributional. They're just really to look at how the organizations in MDAP are behaving. Are we getting better results, better satisfaction? And if you're familiar with the technical report that ISACA comes out with in the April-May timeframe, I know there's a new one now out there for 2025, MDAP is part of that. And really, it's to look at how industry is improving by utilizing the CMMI. So we talked about those results. So what are in those results? Well, there are 3 flavors in those results. There are opportunities, okay? And that's when a practice within the model isn't met. And we have a heat map that we use, just like you see in other appraisals. We make that heat map green, you've met it, yellow, not totally met, and red, we sent the invite and didn't get an RSVP. So we actually do a heat map on all the practices within the practice areas that we choose. And an opportunity is anything of color. So any yellow, any red would have an opportunity. Now remember that this opportunity is for them to address. We never, ever, ever check it. But they're the areas where you haven't met the intent of the model. So indeed, there could be a potential risk there. And we do talk about, when we talk those opportunities, we do phrase them in such a way that it does talk about the risks associated or the benefit that the organization might get from implementing something or fixing, amending, improving that particular practice. Then we have notes. Now, the notes, they're not strengths, not opportunities. They're just something that a little bit more information that we want to give the organization. And there are 2 flavors to these notes. One is a note that, okay, it's not an opportunity. You met the intent of the model, but we're a little bit concerned, should you, a typical one is for an organization that you ask them about a practice and they immediately tell you, Joe does that. Okay. Well, the model doesn't say Joe can't do that, but Joe's the only one that can do that. So we would have a note to the effect that when Joe wins the lottery and doesn't come in the next day, it could be an issue. So it's kind of a risky note. Then there are the encouraging notes. As you're all aware, we can't appraise to intent, but you could get off on a discussion that just talks ad nauseum about this Kaizen event they had, and they haven't been able to put out all of the improvements to it. Well, that's fine. We haven't, we can't really know how it's going to impact the organization or what it's going to look like until it's actually implemented. But we might put a note in there to encourage them to continue with that. Or say, you did this particular Kaizen on such and such a line. You might take a look at this, expanding that result and looking at how it might affect another line. So we give both those warning notes and those encouraging notes. And really, it's those opportunities, those notes that the organization goes back and prioritizes. They're very much associated with risk. And we encourage the organization to look at the opportunities, look at the notes, determine what makes sense to them, what will enhance their organization, what's cost effective for them, but putting a real effort into prioritizing those opportunities and risks and notes in association with the recognition of the risk. So, what we do is basically we take the framework, okay? As you saw, we do appraisals. We then can predict the risks associated with the work that they're currently doing. And because we can predict those risks, we're helping them with their customers, with their releases, in lessening their nonconformances. And basically, what we have seen in effect is we've seen a 95% reduction in complaints per million. That's a pretty big percentage there. We've also seen an 87% reduction in the time to create NCRs and CAPA reports. This is all from the successful implementation of the CMMI practices. Okay. There are case studies out there associated with MDAP. These case studies also talk about the advantages that the model has had in their organizations. As I said, MDAP is included in the technical reports at the current time for ISACA. And I think from the number of organizations, over 120 companies are in this now. And I think I misspoke. I think it's 120 sites. And the organizations that have truly embraced this are including sites, as quickly as we can do them. Some of the large companies, that started with 1 or 2 sites, are up to a dozen, and just keep looking to add additional sites. And I think that speaks very highly because they got their feet wet. They came in, they tested it out. They have now been in it for years, and what they're doing is adding other sites. Have that site come in, have that location come in. And there are locations around the world. We're not only talking about US, we're talking China, Singapore, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. They're including all of these sites in this activity because of the value that they're seeing in it. I mentioned to you one example on the transfers when we can look at 2 of their different sites and make a transfer more effective for them. When we look at a single site that is moving, okay, they're now incorporating themselves with another site. Okay, they're going away, but we can make that transition even smoother. Sometimes organizations, when they're very closely knit, want to have the appraisals jointly. We call them multi-site appraisals. And we either visit those sites during that appraisal, or some organizations bring the sites into a common area and into a common site. And that's actually one of the more rewarding ones, because we come into that site and we start a discussion, and this, one site has never seen this person in person. They've just been on these Zooms. Um, but they work with them, all the time. The organization takes the opportunity to bring those people in so that they sit in those discussions. And let me tell you, there's very little the facilitator of that discussion needs to do. You throw out a question, and these individuals who now have seen themselves for the first time in person just start talking. And we have found it's so rewarding to get them all together and to really talk through what we're doing and what they're doing. So, how have we talked about this? Well, a big thing in the implementation of these results in the risks is understanding the opportunities and notes. Okay. Mention that those actions do not have to be taken. It's totally up to the organization if they want to act on the opportunity, if they want to act on the note. As I said, we are very careful with the phrasing of the opportunity, of the note, in order to enable the organization to, at least in that initial statement, get insight into what they should expect if they don't do it, what the risk might be, but the benefit of doing it. The other thing in understanding those opportunities and notes is we spend a week with them. We don't just leave them with a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. We leave them with a very extensive workbook. And that workbook is what I mentioned about. It produces what we call it the heat map, which shows all the practices and their red, yellow, green status. But associated with each of those practice areas is a tab. In that tab, there is a list of all the practices. And sorry, there are a section for notes. And we basically, whether it had an opportunity or a note or a strength, we comment what you were doing to meet that practice, what we saw. Okay. And if it did have an opportunity or a note, we take the words off the PowerPoint slide and put them in another cell. So when we give the PowerPoint slides, if they see an opportunity, we put a little key on it as to where you'll find that in the heat map, the tab, and the number of the practice. They go down there, they see that exact bullet from the PowerPoint slide with notes. Again, helping them understand the opportunity or the note. It's nice. Again, the timely issue resolution. If it makes a difference to the organization, if they choose to do that, do these different opportunities, risks. A big part of it is the prioritization of the opportunities and risks. We do encourage that they don't let the opportunities and notes get stale. That's why it's nice at first checkpoint, we can say, gee, any questions about the opportunities and notes? It's been a couple months now. Don't know if you had a chance to look at them, but do you have any questions about those? So some of the momentum around that first checkpoint after the appraisal is to really re-engage, see if there is an opportunity for them to make things better. And it's very interesting. Another thing we encourage is look at your continuous improvement and see if any of these can be integrated in. If you were already kind of thinking of that, and maybe this nudges you in prioritizing them differently. And even though we've talked compliance, I said ensuring compliance. Well, it's not a guarantee, but we are very concerned that we anticipate anything that could be a noncompliance, a future problem, a CAPA that might be out there, that we can anticipate by what we've chosen to look at what might affect you in the future. Obviously, continuous process improvement, that's the key. And integrating in with your improvement activities, not letting these opportunities or notes stand alone, but integrating them in with what you're currently doing makes a difference. The regular assessments that we're doing as part of this MDAP activity, coming there every year, showing continued participation. Really, the big thing that the FDA is concerned with, and we tell this to the companies, is that you're continuing to participate to get uh, uh, results that you can or can't work on, but that you're using this asset to assist you in your risk management. And really, as I said, they get a very high level chart, and it just shows here's what they did this year. The FDA also sees what we call a rationale for our plan. What did we choose as the PAs? It's simply to show the FDA that you're continuing to be involved. So, as far as risk prediction, okay, we use these practice areas to determine, to identify risks. And in the year one, right, it was risk to production, because that's what we're baselining you to. After that, it's whatever transaction you want us to look at. And certainly, by looking at these risks, one of the keys that Dr. Shuren has is we want to be able to predict so that we do not run into noncompliances. They are too costly. They are too expensive to recover from. So we want to avoid the noncompliances. We want to enhance processes. And by enhancing processes, that means we want to have the organizations perform more efficiently, more effectively, better products out there, better ability to put products out there in a timely manner. And all of the standards, whether they're ISO standards, FDA regulatory, we've achieved the fact that by adhering to the practices that we choose in those areas for those transactions, you can predict future noncompliances, you can predict risks to performance, to process. That's helping you get a better quality product out there. And you can see by those statistics that we use, better timeliness on NCRs and CAPAs, and better customer satisfaction.